Hello, welcome to this episode of the Martial Truth Podcast. My interview with Tuari Dawson, Sensei. He has his own podcast and YouTube channel, The Invisible Sensei. He's Māori, so we're going to be talking about his Māori cultural martial arts, along with his study of Goju-ryu, Jiu-Jitsu, and many other things. Hope you enjoyed this interview. I've been looking forward to it. Discuss many different topics. As always, if you like the podcast, please click that like button, share, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. I'm closing in on 17,000, right? I'd like to get to that 20,000 mark. All right, consider becoming a monthly member. All right, I appreciate all of you that continue to tune in and watch. We'll have some more interesting interviews coming up in the coming weeks. All right, but let's talk to Tuari Dawson. Tuari Dawson, welcome to the Martial Truth Podcast.
Thank you, Sensei. Thank you for having me. I feel I should say that I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Okay. I told people when I went to Okinawa, I was a little taken aback by how well known the podcast is. Like I met people who were like, "Oh, you're that guy who has that YouTube channel." And, I jokingly say, I tell my wife all the time how famous I am, and she doesn't believe me, right? So, I mean, it's fun for me. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and then we'll get into it.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Sensei, and thank you to Hanchy McCarthy for the recommend as well. I'm very, very much indebted. So my name is Tuari Dawson. In terms of my martial arts background, I'm a Rokudan in Okinawa and Goju-ryu, Yondan in Nihon Jiu-Jitsu. I've trained in Kobudo pretty much most of my karate life as part and parcel of my karate training, and done a practice also iai, naginata, and most jodo and those sort of things as part of the jiu-jitsu style that I do. Or practice badly, and background in judo, Kyokushin karate was where I kind of started. Kyokushin karate and judo, I started back in 1977 as a kid. I had military uncles who were kind enough to insist that I train, and had very much a militaristic attitude about life in terms of keeping your space clean. So it was always really enjoyed physical pursuits. And I have practiced the traditional arts of my people, the Māori people here in New Zealand, since childhood. And we can kind of get into what childhood mainly through games, and then later on the actual weapon work and so on and so forth. And I have a small dojo here in New Zealand, and I podcast a bit on the Invisible Sensei podcast. And when I'm not doing that, I'm listening to Calandra Sensei on his excellent podcast.
Okay. So let's get right into it and talk about the tattoos.
Sure. Oh, well, thank you for asking, Sensei, because, a lot of people don't.
Right.
And I can feel people wanting to. So thank you for being refreshing. So this is called a mata ora. So it goes right up underneath the chin. It's a tradition of my people. If you were in New Zealand, and if any of the listeners or watchers have been to New Zealand, if you've been to any of our major centres, or even our small country towns, you will see people with tāmoko walking around. Our women wear it in the style just underneath the chin.
Okay.
Our men wear it in the mata ora style, and also it covers the top of the head and so on and so forth as well. So it's an old tradition, and for me, it's a little bit of an honor to wear it. An honor in the sense that there's been a renaissance of people taking on mata ora in the last 50 years. It was illegal for a time, which probably, as you know, Sensei, very much mirrors the journey of the Okinawan people as well.
Right.
With their hajichi and so on. And really what it talks about is my genealogy. And it also is something which I think you have to live up to. So I can't road rage anymore, Sensei. I can't stick up a middle finger in a traffic jam or anything like that anymore. because people will look at me and they'll see this first.
Right.
And so I guess what it is, in essence, is a reminder that I need to wear it with dignity, and I need to be worthy of the honor of wearing it. I'm not yet, but I'm working away on it, and it's very much a part of our life.
So is the one that you have, is it unique to you specifically?
Yes,
Okay, so
yes.
every one that we would see is unique to the individual.
The format tends to be the same,
Okay.
but the designs that like for instance here you can see on my chin,
Right.
it's kind of like a hammerhead, a
Right.
mangopare, what we call a mangopare. And the reason that that was put there was that the idea that your words should go out with the directness of a shark, but also if my words are wrong, I've got them down here as well.
Okay.
It means that the shark will come back on me.
Okay.
So if I treat people badly, then the only person I'm getting in trouble is myself.
Okay. And is it the same with the ones on the body?
Well, the ones on my body, these ones here, Sensei. So
Right.
I'll see if I can show you. So you can see on this one, this is the sun, and this one is the moon.
Okay.
So the idea is you've got the sun and the moon in the same place, you should try and be somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
So everything is a reminder that you should always try and find some balance.
Right.
And you'll know that yourself, Sensei, in your martial journey, we're always trying to find that balance.
Oh yeah.
So
100%.
really, it's a reminder to myself that I need to behave myself and try and do good things.
So how are they applied?
So I have what's called a puhoro, which is a full body one, which
Okay.
I got when I was 22.
Okay.
And it was applied with an uhi. So usually you're using uhi is like a chisel,
Okay.
like a hammer and chisel. In most Polynesian cultures, Hawaiian culture, Samoan culture, most of the island cultures have a tattooing tradition.
Right.
and it's part of, I guess, an initiation in a way. And I was always taught that when you take on something like this, it comes with responsibilities. And one of the things which is really interesting, Sensei, is there's a lot of gangs in New Zealand.
Okay.
And one of the things about gangs, I know with your background in law enforcement, I'm not talking to someone who doesn't know what the deal is that there's an element of intimidation. And what would happen is that a lot of the gang members, for various reasons, some of them not untoward, would apply these to intimidate people.
Right.
So it kind of has an intimidating connotation, but that was part of us keeping it alive, strangely. And so now for me, like our politicians all have them. Our women wear moko kauai, our men wear mataora. So it's kind of a standard thing. Although it is a scary thing. When I was in Japan, Sensei, I was with our mutual friend, James Pankovic Sensei, and we'd gone down to Tokyo together, and I went to use the men's room, and I finished doing what I needed to do, and I was washing my hands. There's a gentleman in the stall behind me. He came out, this elderly gentleman, and he just came out, and he was, getting, and he looked up, and I'm 6'4", and this gentleman was probably 5 foot something.
Right.
And he looked at me and just went back in and was fumbling with the lock. For the most part, people were really, really, really kind about it and didn't notice it. But
so it's interesting. When I first went to Japan, I think in 1992, Tokyo, and sometimes I would bring students. I don't have any tattoos, right? My standard joke is if I ever have to become a professional assassin, I don't want any identifying marks, right?
Yeah.
But I brought students that had tattoos, and it was interesting how they'd be asked or looked at. And then, back then it still had that kind of Yakuza association. Now it's changed a lot, especially amongst the younger people, because it's become so popular around the world. And, again, you look at the United States, we had the same thing. You had the motorcycle gangs that would all get these tattoos, right? And it came with the connotation that, oh, if you had all these tattoos, you must be a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
But now
Mm,
tattoos are so common everywhere. I
mm,
mean, nobody even thinks twice about it when you see somebody with a tattoo.
mm.
Um, so yeah, it's just interesting how times change and the way we look at things changes. Now, let me ask you another question. So, in terms of ancient reasons for getting the tattoos,
Mm.
are any of the symbols thought of as protection? Protection for the individual that has these symbols put on their body?
Yeah, I think it's a. I think Sensei, one of the things which I had an opportunity to go to the UK this year,
Okay.
and one of the things that I was able to do was walking around the Natural History Museum in Oxford,
Okay.
and they have an exhibition which talks about the Celtish culture, the ancient Celts,
Right.
or the Pictish people,
Right.
and they would wear tattoos as part of their protection, telling what tribe they came from, or in particular, things like, if they had a certain quality, that then a certain animal would be placed on their skin. And beautiful,
Right.
beautiful. I mean, thousands of years old in tradition. So very much like for Māori culture and Pacifica culture, there are things kind of within the actual design that are designed to be protection, but
Okay.
also, as we said before, designed to be reminders.
Right. Right.
Mm,
So, yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, that's my cultural background is Scottish and Irish.
mm,
So when I did my DNA results, I expected to
mm.
be mostly Italian because of my
Yeah,
last name.
yeah.
Then when I got them back, it turned out I was mostly Scottish and Irish and then Italian.
Mm,
But then I'm
mm.
a mixed bag. I got all, I mean, and the thing is they run your DNA through the system every year because it improves. So
Mm,
it can change. So mine's changed a
mm.
few times as as
Wow.
the science increases. So it's kind
Mm,
of interesting. But
mm,
yeah, that's it. That's interesting with the tattoos and stuff. And again,
mm,
like I said, 50 years ago, you're walking around New York with a tattoo like you have, you'd be getting a lot of looks. Now, I
mm.
think people would barely even bat an eyelash. I mean, because
I
people have
think so.
gotten so used to it. And the other thing too is with the internet and stuff, I think people are more aware of other cultures and have learned to realize, okay, that's a cultural thing. So listen, that's their thing. Why not? I mean, we have things, I'm sure there's things we do that the Maori people would think, well, weird, right? So,
Mm.
it is what it is in terms of, acceptance. But yeah, that's fascinating. So tell me about their martial arts. And you said
Okay.
initially your training started with games.
Mm.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting, Sensei. For me, and I need to say that I'm not speaking as the authority on the subject. I'm an
Okay.
authority on my experience.
Right.
So there are people and elders by far and away more learned than me, but I'll talk about my experience. What would happen is when you were children, certain qualities would be identified. Maybe you had great hand-eye coordination. Maybe you were really good at remembering songs or remembering riddles, or you were very good with children, or you were very good in hunting, and those sort of things. Those sort of characteristics will be recognized young. And then what would happen is you would be taught appropriate games, for want of a better word, that would help to what's the word, to
Enhance,
improve those, yeah,
enhance the
and
ability.
enhance the abilities. So for instance, we have what's called a poi, and a poi is like a small ball on the end of a string
Okay.
made of one of our plants, and you'll see that a lot in our performing arts. And what that actually was just using it. I mean, since I know you're very much a practitioner with nunchaku as part of your training, but really it's really mimicked the movement of nunchaku, and they were taught in games,
Okay.
in songs. And so that was to create wrist flexibility and the ability to be able to use two hands individually. And that later on would translate into using using an empty hand and a weapon, or two weapons, or different kinds of weapons. We had games where called tirako, which are stick games, where you would learn to throw what we call rako or sticks. And again, that was working on hand-eye coordination. And so those sorts of things. And then what would happen is you get into physical activities, which would help you, would enhance your strength, your coordination, and of course, then Sensei, you and I, we come from peoples, the Scottish, the Irish, and the Italian people are hardworking people,
Right.
and like they're out there working, growing vegetables, hunting, fishing, all those sorts of things. So the life itself was quite harsh, and so there was a level of fitness and a level of just hardiness that was bred into them. The idea of learning these things was that later on it would translate into perhaps being focused on a particular skill. So for instance, if you had a great memory, it might be your job to keep the oral histories, because traditionally Māori culture was not a written one, it was an oral tradition. So our genealogies were passed down through a series of chants and stories.
Okay.
And so you might have that person. People who were identified as warriors, Sensei, the idea of being a warrior was part and parcel of the idea of being able to look after your family. So it wasn't just your ability to fight, it was your ability to provide food, to hunt, to find shelter, to look after the, it's very kind of, for want of a better word, communist, the needs of the many.
Right.
And to add to the collective, and also to understand kind of the natural world. It wasn't all about we're going to pick up a weapon and start fighting. And the rationale was you only fought when you really needed to. But if you were going to fight hard, fast, dirty, and make it quick and make it bloody.
Right.
A big part of the idea is that, for want of a better word, Sensei, if you can take someone out in the quickest, most devastating way, that's going to give the person who's coming at you behind them pause.
Right.
So, it's not a hugely complex system, but it is a hugely complex way of thinking when you think about it has to be rough and tumble. There's no kind of
well, it's interesting. I mean, when I first started martial arts, I was only interested in learning how to fight, and obviously there's a lot more to it. But when I became a police officer, I realized there were some flaws in the training that I'd received as far as karate and jiu-jitsu goes, meaning, certain things. And then I realized real quick that in life and death combat, there's no playing games. I mean, you eliminate the threat. And like you said, when I was first a transit cop, we work alone. So yeah, no partner. And you ride in the train, and like there'd be times when I'd be on a subway train in New York City, and there were certain tunnels that you were in the tunnel for 8 minutes. So if something happened during those 8 minutes, and now you're dealing with a guy, there's nobody coming to help you, like nobody. So I learned fast that to eliminate the threat quickly. And if there's more than one guy, which there often was more than one guy, like you said, the friends would not be as quick to want to be next. So yeah, it's interesting. I think all true combat, is similar. But I think a lot of people have gotten away from that because they've never experienced it. And in martial arts, I think when a lot of martial arts people do experience real violence where someone's really trying to kill them, I think a lot of times the first time it's a bit of a shock. I've seen it in police officers where, these guys came from, backgrounds where it wasn't as rough and tumble. And now they're in an environment that's very hostile, the New York City subway system in particular. And now you're dealing with hardened criminals. And usually the first time it's a bit of a shock. So it's interesting that, it's built into your culture, and it would make sense. I think probably at one point it was built into all of our cultures because like you said, it's not just about fighting. It's about hunting, gathering. Can you provide for the family? Can you protect the family from someone trying to harm them? I think in modern society, we've lost a little bit of that, especially us men. I think, one of the things my sons, we talk about all the time is there aren't as many manly men now. You know, they're on their phones doing things, and you know, they're playing video games, but they're not as physical. They're not interested in being able to handle themselves physically. And I think it's a detriment to society because I think when you receive training and you know how to fight, I think you have a tendency to fight less. And it also it gives you a certain confidence knowing that you don't have to fight.
Mm.
But when you don't have anything, you know, I just think it's again, I mean, we see it in the physicality of modern men. A lot of them aren't as physical as they used to be, you know, and I think
Mm.
it's across the world. It's not just in the States or in Europe. I think it's you see problems like that all over. So empty hand in the system, obviously.
Mm.
What would you compare
So,
it to?
um, to be honest, Sensei, look, I'll show you one of the weapons,
Okay,
which I prepared earlier
nice.
for this conversation. So this weapon here is called a patu. You can
Okay,
sort of see there's an edge on it.
right.
And this one's made of wood, but they used to be made of stone as well.
Okay,
You can kind of see. Now it's really funny because when I took it to Japan, people go, "Oh, it's for the rice maker." But the idea, Sensei, you have this string, right? And when you use it, you can thrust with it, you can strike with it, you can use the butt, all those sorts of things. But it's very much a close weapon.
right.
So a lot of times, what would happen was that you'd be fighting in different environments. So let's say that you and I, we look down the beach because we're a coastal people predominantly. We're an inland people as well, but New Zealand is very small, and so you can see there's a lot of coastline. And so you say, "Hey, look, Tuari, there's people we don't know turning up in our bay." So the fight might be up to your hips in water.
Right.
So what would happen is that you'd choose a short weapon because you didn't want to be swinging something long, like with iku, sunokake, the
Right.
whole
Right.
flicking the sand thing.
Right.
That's a technique used for some of our longer weapons, although we
Right.
don't call it sunokake. But the idea that you'd use the weapon for the terrain. So if you had room, you'd use some of the longer weapons, very similar to, iku. I mean, we were also a Stone Age people, so we didn't have metal. So all our weapons are wood, bone, or stone.
Okay.
And we did use, obviously we use obsidian and things like that. But
Okay.
as an example, Sensei, so I might be using this, but I'm also grabbing, seizing, or locking with the other hand, and then I'm wearing what's called an arai. An arai is kind of like armor, but it's not fashioned from wood. It's fashioned from a certain type of plant, which is
Okay.
very kind of hardy.
So it's
And
like a
within
gauntlet
that,
you're wearing
like
on
a
the arm.
gauntlet.
Okay.
So what would happen is I'd wear the gauntlet, but here in the elbow joint, I'd had an obsidian hook.
Okay.
So when I would come in and I come across the throat, or I'd come through like this, the throat, then I catch them on the way through with that secondary weapon. So the idea was always to, if you couldn't outright take the opponent out, you would disable them, so the person coming behind you could finish the job.
Okay.
And oftentimes you fought in twos. Well, where I come from, you fought in pairs. So it might be that it's a close relative of yours or a close friend, sometimes brother and sister. One would have the short weapon, and depending on the terrain, the long weapon would go first, the short weapon would finish.
Okay.
And you would do this at a run, at a flat out sprint. And a lot of the weapons we use in our ceremonies as well, sort of ceremonial challenges and all those sorts of things we use in our performing arts. I guess, when you see traditional Okinawan dance and they're using sai and bo.
Yeah, and using bow. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that persists till today. The idea really behind it was that if you're going to fight, if you got to a point where it was needful to get into a conflict with someone, then be definitive, and just move on. Because, like as you were talking about, our lifestyle was such that you didn't have a lot of time to run around taking armies here and there, because while you're out there running around fighting, who's feeding your family?
Right.
Who's getting the fishing nets in,
Right.
who's going out hunting for food, who's tending to the crops. Everyone did that irrespective of whether or not they were male and female. But there were practicality. So I think what, in terms of how I would describe it, Sensei, it's not big on, like, the techniques are not wide. The technique set, I mean, you'd probably in the technique set in 20 minutes, but the mentality was a little bit different. When I was in Okinawa in 2023, in the end of 23, James Pankovic Sensei was very kindly asked me to teach a couple of seminars, and much to my own nervousness, a lot of pretty high-ranking sensei turned up, and I was
good.
So terribly nervous. But they picked it up so quickly.
Right.
They picked it up so fast. The way in which we teach is a little bit different, and it can be a little bit confronting because we use chants, we use movement, a lot of memory games. For instance, Sensei, we go down, we didn't have crash beds, so we go down to the beach and we get up to our knees in the water. I mean, landing with this much water is better than landing on the hard ground.
Right.
So it's really about taking advantage of what was around, I guess. I hope that answered your question, Sensei.
So now, there was traditional instructors within the community that were like the high level warriors that would pass these techniques on?
I think there were definitely specialists.
Okay.
But I think that there's kind of, well, for me, Sensei, I think that there are people who would say yes to that question.
Right.
In our culture. My own opinion is, sorry, my apologies, is that I don't know whether there was dedicated warriors. I think that everyone learned. Okay. I think that the lifestyle was so, you were there trying to take care of day-to-day matters.
Right.
But I don't think they spend a lot of time, like, I've heard people say, oh, this person went off into the bush and trained for 2 years on a particular technique. And I'm going, well, who was looking after their family while they were doing it? So I think a lot of, I think people have been watching a lot of Kung Fu movies and watching a lot of Toshiro Mifune.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because it's like, some people out were training in Okinawa early, like in the 50s. They want to sometimes act like they were training 8 hours a day. Meanwhile, they're in the military. Like, okay, you don't have a job. The government's paying you to be a soldier. And the honest ones were like, yeah, I trained when I could train, but I had a job to do. I was in the military. I had responsibilities, And I find it funny sometimes, and the way we kind of think of things, It's like, even with me, some of my students, I think they think I'm sitting in this dojo 24 hours a day in a lotus position. On occasion, I eat a few grains of rice, and all I'm doing is training and thinking about martial arts. Meanwhile, I'm at my grandkids' football game. I'm doing other things. I'm hiking. I mean, Arizona is an amazing place to hike. So the martial arts are important, but I think you have to have balance. And I think these ancient cultures across the board, I think a lot of them had more balance because they didn't have the distractions we have in modern times. So again, like I jokingly say that if we still had to hunt for our food, none of us would be overweight, right? If we were still that physically active, right? Now, there's a lot of great things about modern society, right? A lot of great things. What we're doing right now is great. Like, obviously, 50 years ago, we weren't doing this, right? So it's interesting, but I think some of the things, I think a physical culture, I think, is a good thing. And that's why, like with my own kids, I know you have kids too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
3.
So, I have 3 also, 2 boys and a girl. And, my wife, 100% with me, lockstep, they have to learn martial arts. The boys started really young, 2 years old, just joking around in the dojo. The daughter started at 4, all trained hard until they went off to college. And, now they don't really train, but They train for a long time. And my oldest son's a police officer, so he uses it all the time. And, he's constantly telling me, Dad, everything you showed me works. Everything works. And I said, well, I hope so, because I tried it out first, right?
Yeah.
And if it didn't work, I wouldn't
Yeah.
be here, right? But even my daughter had an incident with a guy in college where she had to handle him, and she did. So I think a physical culture is a good thing. I think, so we had it in the house where they saw it with me and my wife, and they did. And now my grandkids, my two grandsons have been training for over a year. Little four, and the little guy started at 3, the other guy was 5. The little guy I don't pay as much attention to. He's trying, and now my two granddaughters are going to start, so I'll have the 4 of them here once a week.
Wonderful.
But yeah, and then they do other sports, which again is important and good. But so so obviously you started training this when you were a kid, right? And then at some point you decided to train in other arts. So what art did you go to first?
My first kind of introduction to martial arts, Sensei, was to Japanese or Okinawan martial arts was when I think I was about 5 or 6.
Okay.
And at my school, grew up a good Catholic boy.
Okay.
Always went to Catholic schools. Father Fitzpatrick, Father O'Malley were our school teachers, and we had good Irish Catholic nuns. And one day I missed the school bus home from school, and so Sister Eileen took me to every small school has a hall,
Right.
and said, just find a seat here. I'll go and call your parents and get you sorted out. Anyway, and when I walked in, there was all these green mats.
Okay.
And that was in the days when tatame were straw, not
not the modern, right.
So it had that smell. It had that,
right.
which
Yeah,
I've always really
yeah.
liked.
Yep.
And I didn't know what it was, so I just sort of kind of had a seat in the corner, and then they were doing judo. So they came out and they were doing ukime. They're doing all their break falls and stuff, which I thought was amazing. And the sensei came over and talked to me, and I remember I was only a little kid, but I just remember his hand, had thick wrists,
right,
and he had those nailed judoka hands with the tape around, and
right.
He was this huge man to me, and he came over and said, "Oh, do you want to come and join us?" And I did, and I loved it, and it was amazing to me, Sensei, because I grew up in a fairly violent household.
Okay.
Where there was a lot of drugs and alcohol and so on and so
Okay.
forth. So you were spending most of your life trying not to be seen or heard. You were trying not to make trouble, right? Or to be seen to make trouble. So for this big, powerful man to come over and talk with such a gentle voice,
right,
and ask me to participate, it just made such an impression on me. And so I started doing judo, and I really enjoyed it. And then around the same time, I got introduced to Kyokushin karate.
Okay.
And Kyokushin in New Zealand, Sensei, was really the karate style for the longest time. There weren't that, there wasn't that many styles of karate in New Zealand to begin with. We're only a small country. We're only, at the moment, we're 5.5 million people in total in our country. So very small. So, and we're at the bottom of the world. So Kyokushin had made it here because of sensei called Sensei John Jarvis.
Okay.
And John Jarvis was he had been shared an apartment in Tokyo, like many people, with Sensei Don Drager.
Oh, okay.
And so he was doing Kyokushin as part and parcel of his training. Drager Sensei introduced him to Moriō Higawana, and at a certain point, what happened in Kyokushinkai then became a split.
Right.
Some people went to Okinawa Goju-ryu, some people stayed with Kyokushinkai. My own sensei were all Udansha and Kyokushin, and decided to take on this new Okinawan art. And kind of at that time, when you're a kid, and I was like maybe 7 or 8 or something, I'm probably like your grandchildren sensei. I didn't know what a style was. I just did what I was told. Right. And then, and then that began the transition to Goju-ryu. And a few years later, started learning, instead of judo, I kind of liked jiu-jitsu. There were some friends of mine who were doing what's a good example? Ippon Seonagi.
Okay.
What they were doing. as they were punching you in the face before they put it on you. And I went,
Right.
that makes sense.
Right. Right.
So, and I really loved, and I really still love Nihon Jiu-Jitsu. And then they were doing weapon work as well. They were incorporating bokken and tanto and jo and all those sort of things. So I just really enjoyed that. And Goju-ryu has been kind of my, I guess, the base of my pillar.
Okay.
For a long time, and I really love it. But I've also had opportunities to do other martial arts and appreciate other arts. Like for instance, Sensei, I didn't know that my original Sensei had done Ishin-ryu while he was living in the States. He was a long-haired hippie in the States.
Okay.
In the 60s.
Okay.
And he'd done Ishin-ryu.
Okay.
Don't ask me where or who with, but I remember because I remember seeing the Mon.
Do you know where he lived?
He was
what part of the States?
He was itinerant.
So because if he's on the West Coast, it'd probably be a Steve Armstrong guy, right?
Yeah.
Midwest was usually or South would be Harold Long, and then East Coast was usually Don Nagel. Those were.
I have to ask him, Sensei.
Yeah, because his
yeah. But I remember he had on his wall. He had the Mon, the
Megami.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember just thinking when he had the Megami and also a pair of Sai. That's the first time I ever saw Sai.
Yeah.
And
so
there's
even me, because I'm out of New York, like my lineage, is traced to Nagel. Because everybody in the New York region, it goes back to Nagel. He came back in the late 50s, early 60s, opened dojo. And, and then like me, I went to Okinawa and saw a different path. But East Coast, it was almost always Nagel. And then the West Coast, it could be a few different guys. And like I said, so it depended on the part of the country. It's interesting. Now it's all changed. But back then, in the early days, there was those were where the guys kind of started, and everything kind of spread out from there.
I think what's interesting, Sensei, is when I came to North America, to Canada, an example of which a couple of years ago, I think it was 2022, Steve Arms Sensei of the Shoshinkan up there in Canada invited me to come up and teach a seminar on what we were talking about, and also our friend James Pankovic came over from Okinawa. And I got to meet Hanchi Cesar Bukowski.
Okay.
We trained with this beautiful dojo owned by Sensei Brad Jones. And I just remember Bukowski Sensei. I was at lunch with them, Steve Sensei, myself, Bukowski Sensei, and Brad Jones, and they were having this conversation about people that I'd only ever read about. Like all these doyens, like I'm familiar with Don Nagel Sensei because I've read about him.
Right.
So for me, the people that yourself, Hunchy McCarthy, Cesar, Bukowski, Hunchy, and all these people that you guys have trained with are people that I've read about in Inside Kung Fu or Karate Illustrated or something.
It's interesting now that I'm getting a little bit older, right? And I can look back a little bit. It's been a pretty amazing ride for me, right? Like me, my resume is pretty good, right? But like I was telling my wife when I got back to Okinawa, I sat down with McCarthy Sensei a lot while I was there, and we talked a lot of different stuff. And his resume is my resume on steroids, right? I mean, it's impressive as hell. And you look at other guys, like when I started in '79. There weren't a lot of books out. You had the Funakoshi books, but I wasn't doing Japanese karate, right? And then you had the Draeger books. And the Draeger books I found interesting because he covered so many different arts. So I could read about all these different martial arts. But again, what you need to understand is in the '70s, you're not even thinking there's any way you can study these arts. Like you're just reading about them. And then Secrets of the Samurai is a famous book by Oscar Ratti. Obviously, I bought that, and later on, I became friends with Oscar Ratti. I have two of his original paintings, and I have one drawing in my dojo here. That's a drawing of me throwing one of my students that he did, and then I have one of his paintings in my house in my living room. And I would go to lunch with him once a month. Sadly, he's passed on now, but like it's just funny, like you said, like sometimes you got to take a step and just realize, like with me in Ishinru, I've trained with most of the first generation students. And,
Mm.
some of them I didn't get to train with, and, some of them I barely had a cup of coffee with, and some of them I trained more extensively. Don Nagel Sensei, I didn't train with a lot, but when I was introduced to him, how was I introduced? I was introduced as a police officer, and
Mm.
he was a police officer.
Mm.
And in Jersey, he's like a legendary police officer.
Mm.
So there was that immediate connection. Like there is always is when two law enforcement, it's like when two military guys get introduced, right?
Yeah.
There's your connection. So you have that initial connection, and then it goes from there. So yeah, it's crazy. Looking back now, like one of my teachers just passed away the other day, Yogi Yosei Sensei.
Yes,
Um,
my condolences in that sense.
yeah, and again, lived an amazing life. Great guy. Uh, and trained with the son of the founder of Uichiru. So he had that connection. Trained with Matayoshi Sensei. I mean, so again, I've been lucky that I've been exposed to certain people, and yeah, I mean, it's crazy, and you'll see again, like even for yourself, as you get a little bit older, you'll look back and say, "Wow, I got to hang out with this guy. I got to do this. I got to do that," and it becomes more important. Like you take a step back and you realize, "Wow, this has been really special." Like when I went to Okinawa, this last trip, my teacher just turned 85, and he blessed me with this promotion last year, right?
Mm. Congratulations,
Which,
by the way.
thank you. Which, again, it took like McCarthy Sensei and a couple of people on Okinawa to make me realize that was a little bit bigger deal than I thought it was, right?
Mm.
And but when he did that, because again, like I've told people, when you're 15 years old training, you're not thinking you're ever getting promoted to Judan by the headmaster of the art. Like,
Mm.
how is that thought even popping into your head? It's not.
Mm.
You're trying to make green belt. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
That's all you're
Yeah.
interested in, right?
Yeah.
And then so I just wanted to go to Okinawa because he's done so much for me, and I just wanted to tell him, you know, I mean, I hope it's not the last time, but when we're getting older, you just never know, right? I said to him, I said, Sensei, I just want to tell you how much, I love you and how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. So it was good that I got to, and it's funny, he was like shrugging it off, like, oh no, but I think it's important to tell our teachers, um, you know, that what they've done for us is important.
Mm.
I think it's good. I think it's good for them to hear. I know in the last about a year ago, I got a message out of the blue from a young lady I taught probably close to 30 years ago, thanking me and my wife, the other people in the dojo for instilling morals in her and giving her the physical ability to defend herself on a few occasions, and just the culture that was in the dojo taught her and her sister, because it was two sisters that trained so much. And when I got that message out of the blue, I was on cloud nine for like a week, right? Because again, it
Mm.
means something to you. You don't know if you're having an effect on people. But I think when you do traditional martial arts, I think there's a greater chance you can have that kind of effect on people,
Mm. Mm.
and I think that's an aspect of what we do that I don't think people sometimes pay enough attention to, you know.
Mm.
And so which branch of Goju-ryu, which line of Goju-ryu do you come from?
So initially, since everyone, well, for the most part in New Zealand, everyone, if they do Goju-ryu, probably came through the IGKF with Mori Higuana
Okay.
Sensei's lineage. Then I was with the Jundokan, and then I was with
The Jindokan's
Sensei.
Eiichi Miyazato, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. So, or within that organization, I
Right.
never got to meet or train with Ichi
Right.
Miyazato. And then with Chinen Tiro Sensei,
Okay.
who lived up in Spokane,
Sure.
and who was a huge influence. My sensei left the IGKF or resigned from the IGKF, I think around 1989, 1990,
Okay.
and then kind of did his own thing. And at that time, as I said, I was young. I might have been a young Shodan. Maybe I was a free school. I can't remember. But for me, there was kind of a no-brainer. I really respected my sensei. And funnily enough, he was a cop too. but just a good guy,
Right.
a good sensei. I mean, he'd do things like I call my podcast sensei the Invisible Sensei podcast in
Right.
memory of all those sensei, probably much like yourself and others, who do these things kind of in the background that no one knows about to help
Right.
their
Right.
students.
Right.
And he was one of these people. He was a respected policeman, but he would do things like, I didn't have, I didn't come. I have come from difficult circumstances, and he always made time for me. He would come and pick me up to bring me to training or give me a ride home, and I treasured those rides because he
Right.
would talk to me about
Right.
karate and all these sort of things. And for me, as long as I live, Sensei, those were some of the most important, pivotal moments of my life. And I've trained with lots of amazing people, but I'm so grateful to have had this Scottish cop who took time
Right.
to keep me on the right path and just to talk to me about things. And I think that when it comes to with Goju-ryu, the idea of the hard
And
and
the
the
soft.
yielding
Right.
is the idea that, like, is exactly what you're saying. Sensei Laurie Scott was my original Goju-ryu sensei. He was one of the hardest trainers, and like doing kotiki tai with him was just absolute murder.
Right.
His forearms were like, and I remember grabbing his wrists, and his wrists were like this. And he was a
Right.
much smaller man than me, but just a devastating fighter. But the gentlest, kindest, most humble, and most polite person I've probably ever met, and respectful in so many ways. Um, and so that kind of stayed with me. And I think for me, what I look for, to your point before about morals, I mean, I don't know if I'm in a place to sort of point people towards anything in particular in terms of how they should live their lives. But I
Right.
think every time I put my gear on, I think about that Scottish cop,
Well, you know what
and I
I
try to live
say?
up to that.
I say, I don't, one of my friends is a hippie radical from the 60s, right? And he's one of my best friends. He trained with me in karate briefly. He still lives in New York. He owns a flower shop. And he did the flowers for my wedding. So I know the guy. I mean, we're married
Yeah,
38 years, so I know the guy
yeah,
forever.
yeah.
And he once said to me, he said, "You're the most moral guy I know," right? And I
Mm,
said, "Okay, right." And but I said, "But I don't force my morals on others." Like in other words, I try to be an example,
mm,
but I'm not gonna tell people, well, you can't do this or you can't do that. My first instructor tried to do that with me, and he wasn't a very moral guy, right?
mm,
And that's why I left eventually, right? But you talk about having an effect on people. It's true because I was 17. I was a brown belt, and I got thrust into teaching the children's classes. The black belt who was supposed to teach them, his
mm,
mother got diagnosed with cancer. He couldn't
mm,
do it. I
mm,
was just starting college. I might have been my freshman year of college. And the teacher says to me, "Well, you're the only guy that can do it. So it's you or nothing." I'm like, "But I'm only a brown belt." It's like, "It's all right. You could teach it as a brown belt." Okay. Again, this is like, 1980 or something, right?
mm,
So I'm like, okay. So I start teaching it. Of course, I'm the worst instructor on the planet, right? I mean, I don't know what I'm doing, right? I'm hard on these
mm,
kids. They got to be perfect. I don't know what I'm
uh,
doing.
mm,
But I was probably teaching the class maybe about a year, and this 12-year-old kid joins the class, and he's there a month or two, and then he's not there for like 3 weeks, and then he walks
mm,
back in with his mom, and his mom calls me on the side and says to me, I says, "Oh, what's going on? Where he's been?" And she says, "Oh, his father passed away suddenly." Right.
mm,
And I was like, "Oh," and I just met the father. So I was like, "Oh my God." So she goes, "Yeah, I'm hoping you'll help me keep an eye on him," she says to me.
mm,
So I'm 17 years old and she says this to me, right? So I'm like, "Okay, right." So, he's training, he's training, he's training. He's there for years. And I did keep an eye on him. Eventually graduated high school. I kept him on the straight and narrow. If the mother reached out to me and said, "Hey, he's doing this or doing that," I would, have a talking with him, straighten him out. After he got out of high school, he went in the Air Force, was in Desert Storm and Desert Shield, got out of the Air Force, moved all around the country, working as, aircraft mechanic. Um, and he was always in contact with me. Literally called
mm,
me from Desert Storm.
mm.
He's over there
Wow.
fighting, support division, right? But he called me to
Mm,
let me know he's okay. He would come out for Christmas sometimes with us. Doesn't have a lot of family, so he's always been close with me. So then about a year ago, year and a half ago, he starts having some health problems. My wife's a doctor. He reaches out. She basically reads him the riot act. Okay, you need to stop this. You need to stop this. You know, well, is there any good news? Yeah, the good news is if you do what I tell you, you won't die. That's what my wife tells him. She tells him right out. Okay, she says, your family, it's not like I'm not going to beat around the bush like I might with a patient. I'm telling you right out. So I called him and I said, hey, I'm only going to make this offer once. There's nothing attached, but you should start doing Zoom classes with me. I'll help you get in shape, help you get your health in order. And maybe you should finish what you started all those years ago. You only made brown belt. Maybe you should finish and get to black belt and make that a goal. And so we've been doing that. We've been doing that for like a year and a half now. He's flown out here a couple of times where he comes out. He just was out here not too long ago for 10 days with training every day. He's lost a lot of weight, gotten himself in better shape. And when he was out here the one time, I didn't know he didn't know. His mother never told him that she asked me to keep an eye on him. So I mentioned that story to him literally like 6 or 8 months ago. And he goes, what? I said, what do you mean what? He goes, what are you talking about? She asked you to keep an eye on me? And I said, yeah, she asked me when you first came back to the dojo. She goes, she never told me that. I said, oh, well, she 100% did. He goes, so that's why initially you were keeping, I said, yeah. And I said, I said, if I had to think about why as a 17-year-old I would take that responsibility on myself, I have no idea. I have no idea, but God works in mysterious ways, and whatever happened. So yeah, so it's interesting. You can, even in a non-martial arts sense, through the martial arts, you can have a profound impact on people just on how you treat them, how you act towards them. Maybe a little bit of advice you can give them. Like I jokingly say all the time, there's certain advice I don't give. I don't advise people on their marriages. I don't advise people on, oh yeah, quit your job, get a new job, because then if they can't get a job, right, but little things, I'll advise on, or maybe push them in a certain direction. But yeah, I think it's an overlooked thing, and I think some of the guys, they don't realize the impact they can have on a life. And even as a cop, I mean, you can do something. Like I had a guy get robbed, and comes up to me, barely speaks English. He's Spanish. He's giving me the description. Someone Spanish comes over, translates. Just so happens the one person that robbed him was orange from head to toe, literally orange dyed hair, orange shirt, orange shorts, orange socks, orange sneakers. Swear to God, 100% true story.
Yeah.
And so we go. Somebody else says, oh yeah, guy all in orange. They went that way. I flag down a cab. We jump in a cab. We drive by them. There he is. The guy's all in orange. I'm laughing because I'm like, oh my God, this guy's all in orange. I can't believe it. The dumbest criminal in the world. There's 3 of them. Supposedly one's got a gun. So I make the cabbie turn the corner. I leave my hat in the car. I tell the cabbie, don't leave. My hat's in the car. Stay with him. The guy who was robbed is holding my arm, trying to prevent me from getting out of the car. I'm in full uniform. I'm by myself. I go, I got to go get them. He goes, no, you don't. It's too dangerous. Yeah, don't worry. I go out. I take them at gunpoint. No gun. Did they have a gun? I don't know, but there was no gun. Arrest the 3 of them. And that's it. They go to jail. They got multiple years. Fast forward about 5 years later, I'm working in Brooklyn now. That was in Manhattan in New York City. I'm now in Brooklyn. And this guy comes up, pays his fare, and walks through, and I'm standing there, and it's the guy that got robbed. It's the victim. And he looks at me, and his eyes get big, and he walks over and just puts me. I'm in full uniform. He just puts me in a bear hug. And he's just saying, thank you for that day, right? I didn't, to me, it wasn't that big a deal. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to get the bad guys, right? That's my function, right? But to this guy, the fact that I guess he felt he didn't want me to do it because it was dangerous, right? And I was like, no, don't worry about it, right? But again, you don't realize the impact you can have on what to you doesn't seem like a big deal. And then to somebody else, it was a big deal to them. And I think that's something I think as sensei, more of us need to realize and sometimes try to do more of those things that have those kinds of impacts. Now, I know you work with youth, right?
Mm. Yeah, I work with young men and men and young men, I should say. And it so resonates for me with what you're saying. I sort of see like a friend of mine, Christian Mahinai, he's a Uichiru practitioner and sensei, although he wouldn't call himself a sensei, from Alberta. And we were having a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the Bubishi.
Okay.
And he's about to go to Okinawa. And I said, if you can, you should try and make contact with Hanshi McCarthy. 100%. And the idea of doing it to him was just like, oh, not in a million years will I sort of, I'm only a Yondan, and I'm going, he's actually really approachable if you approach with in a respectful manner and you do it in the right way. It's like what you're saying, Cesar, these are conversations that you'll have and conversations that he'll have, and sort of these senior, I guess, for one of the word, kind of elder statesmen of karate, budo, kobudo, whatever, they will have these moments with people and they will not realize how powerful they can actually be. I think, there's that kind of thing where I've trained with some people for 10 years. And to be honest, maybe I'm a slow student. I've kind of not learned that much.
Right.
And I've kind of looked at it and gone, I don't know how much I've actually learned. And then I'll sit down and have a coffee with a sensei for half an hour. And I'm going, I've learned more in this conversation and been given more direction and helped to set a goal.
Right.
In this 20-minute conversation that I have in the last 10 years. And I think that, we never know the effect that we can have on each other, or how we can impact upon how other people perceive us.
And the other issue is, and I'll just illustrate this with a very quick story. But one of the other things is the opposite effect. The guy who gets promoted to a high downgrade, and now all of a sudden he thinks that means he can talk down to people. Or if you're a junior to him, he can talk to you in a way. And so a few years ago, I was with Master Shimabuku in Maine, and I said to him, listen, Sensei, I'm just going to let you know. Now, I know the guy forever. Okay. So I said to him, just give you an idea how well I know him. He sends me about 8 months ago, he sends me a letter out of the blue congratulating me on the 40th anniversary of my dojo.
Wow.
I didn't know it was the 40th anniversary of my dojo. And he goes by, because he came to my dojo when I had a dojo in New York City, in Manhattan, near the mayor's residence. He came to do a seminar there. He taught a seminar there. So I was introduced to him. This is my dojo, right? So that was his mind. That was the date. So he wrote it down. That's the date when I met Mike and started his dojo, right? But I had said to him up in Maine, I said, Sensei, now that I'm a little bit more senior, I'm just letting you know, like, if I hear one of these other senior dons in our group talk down to someone, I'm just letting you know I'm gonna call him out on it. I'm going to confront him and tell him you shouldn't talk to people like that. And he said, good, right? And I had to do it to someone in Europe who started speaking very, like, in a condescending way to a volunteer. And I just looked at the guy and I said his first name and I looked at him in a certain way. And I said, hey. And he looked at me. He goes, oh, sorry, Mike. And I was like, there's no need for that. These are volunteers. There's no need to talk to somebody like that. So, it works both ways, right? You can be a good influence and you can also, and like I tell my kids, all these experiences are good because the bad experiences teach you something too, right?
Well, Sensei, I have an experience very similar, and this happened only a couple of years ago. I was guest at a seminar for another style, and I went to the seminar, and I was very happy to be there. I felt very honored. And one of the instructors came over and she started to talk to me, and I was like, oh, hey, how you going? And it was really nice. And she was maybe a Yondan, maybe, or Gordon. I can't remember what she was, whatever she was. And we were just there having a conversation. And I saw a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in a couple of years, and he come over and says, "Oh," and asked her to excuse me for a moment, and I just give him a big bear hug, and so great to see you, and so on and so forth, and let's have lunch at the break, and so on, and then when I said I returned back to the conversation, and she said to me, "But he's only a brown belt. Why are you talking to him? And he's only a brown belt." I've never forgotten that. I'm going, these belts, whatever belt it is you're wearing or I'm wearing and he's wearing, we're all human beings.
Yeah,
he may be, that it's all I couldn't believe that we could dismiss people in such a way. It just made me ill.
I just went back to New York to do my annual seminars, and young guy drove up from Pennsylvania. Not that young, but like now everybody's younger than me, so he's young, right? And he walks in, and I extend my hand. And I says, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Mike," right? And he looks at me, shaking my hand, and he says, "I got to tell you, Sensei, I feel a little starstruck," right? So I look at him, right? And one of my black belts, one of my senior guys who's an 8th Dan under me, he goes to him, "We'll cure you of that real quick," right? And everybody laughed, right? And again, that's the way it should be. Like, I know, I know when my Taiji master introduces himself, he says, "Hi, I'm Joseph." I remember parents came on a trip with me to Okinawa. And, they said, what do we call Shimabuku Sensei? I said, just call him Sensei, because it's an easy thing to remember, right? But I remember when he introduced himself to them, because they weren't martial artists, he introduced himself as Kichiro, right? So they said to me afterwards, they go, I says, "Yeah, just call him Sensei. Let's make sure none of us get in trouble. Let's just, call him Sensei." But it's funny. Yeah, it's weird. The whole rank thing, like I tell people all the time, no one that tried to kill me ever asked me what rank I was. And again, like honestly, I've had a dojo now for over 40 years. So I've had a dojo since about 1983. And I don't think 5 people have ever walked in that dojo and asked me what rank I was. They come in, they watch a class or they try a class. If they like what they see, they join. Again, that's why I just I say to people all the time, like the rank thing is like, it's great. Your teacher's giving you an attaboy. He's telling you he appreciates your hard work or whatever. Fine. But that's it. Like, don't think there's anything more to it, because there is nothing more to it. I mean, it's just,
Well, look, Sensei, I had another mutual friend of ours, Josh Simmers,
Sure.
Sensei of Okinawa Kempo, with Matsuda Sensei. When I was in Okinawa, him and I hang out. He's like a brother from another mother.
Right.
We go up to the Kaikan, but we end up training in the old Budokan. I like the second floor with the mats.
Second floor is great.
And we're kind of doing some training. He's throwing me around and this and that, and we're having a great time. And like I'm probably I probably got a couple of inches on him, so but he's a great karate and kobudo practitioner. But the easiest going guy, and then he also does Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and he's really good at it.
Right.
So I went to his Brazilian jiu-jitsu class, going, okay, and because I've done a little bit of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, not to a huge degree, but I've done some, and I just remember getting on the floor, getting into just rolling for I think maybe half an hour, maybe not even half an hour. It felt like 4 hours. I was gassed. Everyone I fought was like, it was his sensei there was the loveliest, easiest going guy, but it was like fighting. He was like fighting PVA glue. He just was all over me.
Right.
He was everywhere I didn't want him to be. And I think he might have tapped me. I don't know. I lost count.
Right.
But what I noticed about him was there was a humbleness in that.
Right.
There was a humbleness, and I felt extremely humbled.
Yeah.
But and I think for me, looking at people like Josh and James and those sorts of guys who are very accomplished, but they continually put themselves in positions where they're learning something, even if they're not in a position of advantage.
Yeah. So
that speaks so much to their character.
Yeah, when I was there, James asked me if I teach a class in knife defense.
You said it was great, by the way.
Right, which I did, and because again, I said because what happened, what came up in the discussion, one of the things I've got a problem with Okinawa right now is that karate is only being treated really as a sport, and
Mm,
I'm not against it as a sport, but I don't think you want to lose the original intent. I think it just takes away
mm,
from it. And so I mentioned to him that the founder of Ishinryu had a knife defense curriculum. He had a ground fighting
mm,
curriculum. And I asked him and Dan Antonsen, I said, when's the last time you guys live here? When's the last time you saw an Okinawan sensei do knife defense?
mm,
And they looked at each other and they said, never. And I said, when's the last time you saw an Okinawan sensei do ground fighting? And they said,
mm,
never. I said, okay, right. And so James goes, well, it's very safe here. I said, I understand that, but Okinawans don't travel.
mm,
Like you're not going to travel somewhere where maybe it's not as safe, right?
mm,
So that was my thing, and that's when he said, oh, I'd love to learn your knife defense techniques, and I says, oh well, so initially I said, well, I can meet you here tomorrow morning. He goes, well, I have an adult class tonight. Would you mind sticking around and teaching it? I said, sure, I'll do that. So I did. I think it was an hour and a half or 2 hours, and
mm,
I didn't cover that much. I mean, it's
mm,
all the various attacks you see. I mean, when you're a cop, you learn quickly that some of the people's approach to knife defense is kind of silly.
mm.
Like, I don't know if you've ever seen the old Jim Carrey skit from In Living
Yes.
Color.
You
Yeah.
attacked me wrong.
Yeah. And again, like, yeah,
Yeah.
like I start off, I have a program where it starts off from a basic way and then it goes up to where that guy's
Mm,
trying to stick you multiple times and you have to be able
mm,
to deal with that, right? Because that's how the guy out there is going to stab you. He's not going to stab and just stand there and let you do a technique to him.
mm,
So yeah, so I had a good time teaching there. It was a lot of fun. His dojo's great. I was amazed at how many foreigners are now teaching there.
mm,
So it's
mm.
great,
Well, I think also too, Sensei, it's interesting where, there's so many great foreign practitioners. I mean, I suppose, like if you're talking about influences, I mean, for me, you know, Patrick McCarthy Sensei has been a massive influence all over the
Oh
world,
yeah.
but particularly in New Zealand, in
Okay.
the 80s and 90s, a lot of Sensei would bring him out. But the thing is that he was an unknown quantity in the sense that he did things no one else did.
Right.
So one of the first things I ever saw in the video was he started with he didn't start with a punch or a kick. He started with a headbutt.
Right. Right.
Then he swept the guy,
Right.
put him in a calf slice, turned him
Right.
over, put him into a crab, and stood on his foot and pushed him into I was like going, and then next minute he's doing kobudo, and the
Right.
next minute he's doing his two-person drills and he's doing
Right.
kata. So
Right.
I'm going, I don't know what that is, but I want to do that. And he was so different, and I think that the interesting thing too is you can't argue with you've earned the right to have your opinion in the sense that because of your pedigree and who you've trained with and how you've done your training, I think people like you and him and some of these other sensei have have the right to the opinion. I think the problem is when people have done maybe they're sure they're nidan and or at a somewhat junior level, and I count myself amongst that we haven't trained long enough to really have an opinion, or I would focus more on my own training rather than going, Okinawan karate is this and Okinawan karate needs to do that. I think
Well,
that it just it's a fine line.
well, McCarthy, you have a couple of factors. One is physically a gifted guy. Like
Mm,
physically, he's very good. And then he also has real fighting experience. And when you have real fighting experience, and you have a sensei show you a technique that is complete nonsense.
mm,
Okay, right. And again, I had a lot of that going on when I was coming up, right? Again, when you're 15 and they show you a fighting application for moving the kata, you don't know any better. You go, okay, right?
mm,
But then I become a cop and now I'm starting to get into fights, a lot of fights, okay?
mm,
Um, and I'm realizing, okay, like that's nonsense, right? And
mm,
then, I met a Goju-ryu sensei. We were both teaching at a seminar. I was going to teach, I think I was teaching jujitsu. Sensei Adler had us both out. He introduced me to
mm,
him. This sensei was a big Bubishi person, had a copy of one of the Bubishis. Um, and he invited me to start coming out to his house. So I would go out like once a month on a Sunday to train. And I wasn't learning Goju-ryu. He would watch me do an Isshin Rukata and he'd show me fighting applications. And I was like, okay, no, none of the Isshin-ryu sensei are showing me these fighting applications, right? So then, McCarthy's Bubishi comes out, and I don't remember how I initially met McCarthy. I can't remember. He may remember, but he came out to me 2 or 3 times we stayed at my house. We trained, and I was interested in Bubishi. And again, he's doing some of the same type of bunkai Oyo practices that this Goju-ryu guy is doing. So I was kind of going in a different direction with my karate. But it's interesting because the Isshin-ryu seniors would say, "Oh, you're doing Calandra-ryu. You're not doing Isshin-ryu." Because their philosophy was, well, if the founder didn't show this to us in the big 8 months that we were there, but then, the headmaster's son, my teacher, I had told him I need you to make DVDs. This is when we're doing DVDs, right? And he's like, no, there's enough old men doing karate. He goes, you do them. So I said, me? He goes, yeah. I said, well, if I do them, I'm going to do my fighting techniques. And he said, okay, now the DVD series is 30 years old and I've evolved more, but people still watch those DVDs. They're up on YouTube for free. They like them. But I remember when I sent him the first DVD, I was concerned and I said, well, how is it? He goes, oh, it's great. It's wonderful. It shows Isshin-ryu would be so powerful. You make more. But the first generation guys were like, oh, that's not Isshin-ryu. That's Calandra-ryu. Like, you're making that stuff up. Okay. And so again, it's interesting, right? So the guys that start to think outside the box a little bit are always initially the subject of attacks. So, McCarthy's experienced it dramatically. I mean, we had the conversation. I was there years ago in my office. He was going after somebody because someone had come after him, and I said, Sensei, you just got to ignore these people. I said, they're idiots. You just got to ignore them. And now he's gotten older. He said to me, he says, you gave me that advice all those years ago. He says, now I'm finally taking it a little bit more. I says, yeah, like I said, I get attacked and stuff. Like even when I got back from Okinawa and that guy reached out for McCarthy and I did that podcast, I didn't name any names. I did that podcast because I thought maybe these young guys will see this and these guys will realize don't do this stuff. It's just not good and it doesn't make any sense and it doesn't help anything, we all gossip about each other. I mean, you go on Okinawa, the Okinawan teachers gossip about guys too, to think, oh, they don't gossip about them. Forget it. They don't gossip. Everybody does it, right? But again, in public, have a certain decorum, and don't shoot the messenger right away. Maybe take a step back and see what the messenger really has to say. And then, think about it a little bit. You might realize the messenger's message is the right message. And I think with a lot of people with McCarthy Sensei, they've come to realize that. And I think a lot of people in Isshin-ryu, when I was on Okinawa, hearing things, these guys that aren't Isshin-ryu guys talk to me about me and say they watch my videos and they watch this and they watch this. And, they said to me, you don't move like the other Isshin-ryu guys. And I said, well, obviously I have other backgrounds and other arts and stuff. But I said, also the way I've delved into karate is one from a biomechanical perspective, right? Where I'm trying to develop high level body mechanics, right? And I think that's why I'm still able to move the way I do at my age, right? And I'm hoping 10 years from now, I'm still sitting here saying that, right? But yeah, it's always interesting, and McCarthy, again, people need to realize the impact he's had. I mean, his impact has been tremendous.
Well, I think also too, like at the moment, I've been really lucky that I've been distance training with another one of your friends and guest, Scott Moot Sensei.
Oh, sure.
Learning Ruho-ryu.
Right.
And I found that for me as a field of personal study, I'm finding that so interesting. He was kind enough to give me his excellent book. When you sort of see people who are both, they have this martial aspect to their karate, they have this historical aspect and this research aspect to it. It makes it a lot richer. But I think also too that there's the preservation and development don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. I think you can appreciate, like as you say, Sensei, the way that I do Goju-ryu. So a friend of mine was talking about, we're going to change our name to a certain, we're going to be Okinawan karate, and what he does to me is Okinawan karate.
Right.
And I'm going, I don't know. And we were just having a conversation about it, going, I don't know if what I teach, if Miyagi Sensei was still around, I don't know if he'd look at it and see it as Goju-ryu. I don't know if a lot of the, if I went to the Jundokan and so on and so forth and did these sorts of things. I'm an independent now, so I'm just trying to do the karate that makes the most sense to me and to enjoy it. You're talking about promotion, Sensei. I wasn't promoted on Okinawa. I was promoted here in New Zealand by a group of senior Sensei who just in the other room, we were having lunch. We'd done a great training in a little dojo, and they just literally pushed an envelope across the table at me, and I had hoped it was going to be filled with $100 bills, but
right.
It wasn't.
That's what you want.
Yeah, but it was this bit, and it was a promotion and recognition of Rokudan.
Right.
Now, because I received that from people I respect
Right.
and look up to, that had more meaning to me than anything else. I mean, does that make me legitimate or not? I don't really know. But hopefully, if I'm practicing, if you say, "Oh, okay, Tuari, show me Sanction or show me Sepai," you go, "Oh, that kind of looks like what I'd expect someone at your level to be able to do." That's the best I can hope for.
Right.
And I think that sometimes, people go. I mean, you see people going to Okinawa all the time, Sensei, and I love the fact that, I have the deepest respect for Okinawan culture, but I think sometimes people are looking for more than karate. I think people are looking for, like you said, they're looking for the sensei who sits on the lotus leaf and
Right.
meditates 12 hours a day on one
Right.
finger.
Right.
And I think that for me, when I go to Okinawa, I'm going there in appreciation of Okinawan culture. I'm not looking for mysteries. I have a
Right.
language, a culture, and a custom
Right.
that I'm trying to live up to
Right.
here in New Zealand. And I think that for me, sometimes I see people going there and they kind of get stars in their eyes about, Okinawan karate, which is completely valid. But I think also too, don't forget who you are and what you bring in your life experience. And I mean, would it be ridiculous to sort of say, you spent decades and decades as a cop in one of the most dangerous cities in the world, and say, look, Calandra Sensei, forget all that. Someone's going to attack you overhand with a tanto, and they're going to stand there for 10 minutes while you figure it out.
Right.
Now, how does that develop the style or the practitioner for me to say, oh, we don't do that in our style, so let's not do it. So when they say, oh, you're doing Calandra, I'm going, for me, Sensei, I mean, that's kind of a compliment.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, believe me, it's pretty hard to insult me at this point in my life. And, I'll tell you something, Yogi Sensei said to me several years ago. He said, Okinawa has a problem in that it's painted itself into a box, and that box, or a corner, and that corner is that sport. He goes, so like my dojo, we don't go to tournaments, so I don't have good karate. He said, but when I started karate, we were taught that when you put your hand on the doorknob to walk out, you better be ready. So again, that's that. And again, so I think you want to have both. So I think we have people in the West that, because, especially if you live in a freer society, if you live in a more multicultural society, I think you are going to naturally have some more crime. I just think that's the way it is. Okay. When you live in a homogenous society like Okinawa or Japan, that has more of a group think, you're not going to have as much crime, even though there is crime there. I mean, they downplay it, but there's crime there too. But, so I think in the West, we still have a little bit more of the interest in having that edge, that ability to actually use it for real, that if we need it, it's going to be there. Right. And, like I say now, like, hopefully my fighting days are over, but I still train like I'm going to go out tomorrow and get attacked by 3 guys in a parking lot. I mean, I cannot change the way. And I've had people, especially in Tai Chi, like, like my Tai Chi master never talks about Chi. Everything's physical. he'll privately, he'll have a conversation with you, but in public, he's like, we're not going down that path. We're not going down the woo-woo path. We're going to show that this is a highly complicated physical art. And if you can get a little bit of it, oh boy, right? And like in my Tai Chi classes, I teach knife defense. I teach gun disarm. I teach, people work against multiple opponents. Okay. I can guarantee you there's probably nobody else teaching Tai Chi that's teaching knife defense in their Tai Chi class. Because again, it's been captured by the woo-woo guys, right? Instead of it being, and again, there's room for that in it, but it's a martial art. And if you don't teach it as a martial art, what are you teaching? So,
well, it seems, Sensei, one thing that I find difficult that I've seen, not just in Okinawa, but in karate in general, you have these really hard external styles that do, sunshin and all these sorts of things and break boards over each other. And I include Goju-ryu in that.
Right.
But then when they're sparring, it's like they wear pads and they're bouncing up and down doing tournament techniques. Right. I said, for me, I think that your kata should manifest itself in your fighting. I think, with control. I also too, we didn't come up wearing protective equipment. My students don't wear protective equipment.
Mine
they
either.
will wear protective equipment if they have an injury.
Right, of course. That's a different story. Right.
But the thing is that if you can't throw a technique with control, don't throw that technique.
Right.
And it's like, so for me, unlike if someone like Sensei, I love when I'm sparring with people who, and we have a mutual understanding,
right,
that have long hair.
Right.
I love it. I'm going, you've provided this wonderful handle for me. Thank you.
Right.
Get that hair and just pull it back and you've got that chin. So for me, I think that I find karate more satisfying when you can take things. I mean, it's all done with control, and you might use kake to get there or dandori or whatever. But for me, I think that what is the point of doing all this incredible body conditioning and all that sort of stuff, and then you just stand there and bounce and throw reverse punches or front kicks at each other or moshi getting? I mean, I want to be close enough to someone that they can't kick me. I want to lead with a headbutt.
I was in London the first time teaching a group of Ishinru students that are under me there. And we're all teenagers. So it was over 10 years ago. So I was 50, 51, whatever it was. And I taught a bunch of stuff. And then I said, is there anything you guys would like to do? And I saw a couple of them looking at each other. And I looked at them. I said, oh, would you like to spar with Sensei? Because they're more sport karate.
Yeah.
So I go, oh, would you like to spar with Sensei? And they go, so the one guy goes, yeah. So, and I see him looking at another guy, and I'm like, okay, so these are the guys that think they're fighters. This is my mind. So I step out, I bow to him. I said, okay, go ahead. And I don't even take a kamae. I just stand there, right? And he goes, I said, do whatever you want, right? And he went to attack, and I had him on the floor so fast, and I hit him about 5 times. And I didn't hit him. I'm just touching his gi, right? And his face was like this, and I help him up. I said, okay, you want to try again? He goes, yeah, right? And I know what he's thinking. He's thinking, oh, now we know what he's going to do. It's going to be no problem. And as soon as he moved, I was through him, and he's on the floor. So I said, anybody else? And the guy that was in the crowd came out, right? And he's a little bigger, a little stronger. And I said, okay, whenever you're ready. And I went through him. And then at the end, I looked at them all, and I said, let me explain something to you now. This is the first time you're training with me. I said, so here's the difference between my karate and your karate. Your karate is you guys go to tournaments. That's great. If you enjoy it and it brings joy to your life, great. I am never scoring a point. My karate is about eliminating you as a threat. I said, so now you've seen the difference between your karate and my karate. I'm not telling you not to practice the sport karate, but it might help you a little bit if you learn a little bit of my karate too, because my karate is what's going to save your life. And, like same thing here in the dojo. When I first came out here, teenagers, I got teenagers, right? Punch me in the face. And the punch is going like out here. I'm like, no, my face is over here. Punch me over here. What if I hit you? If you hit me, don't worry about it. But I don't think that's going to happen. But you throw the punch. So it took a while for me to get them to where they're actually trying to hit me, right? And, and then I get the question, well, how, you move so fast, right? I said, well, it's not so much speed. It's I move smooth. There's a little bit of a difference. But yeah, we work up to where you have to be able to deal with a full speed punch, because what is the guy going to attack you with out there? it's
Yeah.
not going to be, he's going to try to take your head off. Okay, so can
Yeah.
you deal with that? Now, obviously, with like you said, within a control situation, I don't think full contact training is healthy. I don't think it's healthy for the body. You want to do it, knock yourself out. Not for me. Um, I never did full contact, and I never had a problem in combat, right? But in the dojo, like there were years I say all the time where it was like a combat laboratory. Cops were walking in. Okay, I got attacked like this last night. This is what I did. Is there something better we could have done? And then that class, we're figuring it out. Like maybe you should have done this or that. Oh yeah, have some, and the non-law enforcement people in the room who like, accountants and computer guys and school teachers,
Yeah.
they're like fascinated because they're like, listen,
Yeah.
like, what do you mean two guys came at you like that? Like,
Yeah.
I sit at a desk or, I'm whatever, right? And we're all like excited. Like, this is like, okay, let's figure this out so we can figure out make the martial art better. So I think ultimately, you start mimicking your teacher, you start following your teacher, but at some point, you have to find what's best for you and your body. If you don't find what works best for you, you're not going to reach the level you could have reached.
Well,
Simple
Sensei,
as that.
on that, I totally agree. I think, and as you say, there's some fantastic tournament fighters out there that I think can actually fight.
Oh yeah.
I'm not against tournaments either, but I just sort of think that doesn't really hold my interest because I suppose for me, I like the idea that you're using the full range of what exists in
Right.
karate. And I think that for me, one of the sort of formative things you're talking about, knife defense, when I was getting my puhoro, which is my full body, my 3/4 body traditional tattoo, I've got a stab wound from when I was doing door work. And what the guy who was doing it, the tohunga who was doing it, says, I'm going to go around that. I'm not going to go over the top of that. He says, because that was a lesson you should remember. And so, whenever I have a shower, whatnot, and I can see the stab wound, and I can actually go, that's a good memory. But for me, one of the things which is really cool was that our sensei encouraged us as young black belts to do door work. And you know what it's like, Sensei, you're getting on the door with these guys.
Oh yeah.
Now those are career doormen, these are career bouncers that have been at it for decades.
Right.
Old boxers, just hard men
Right.
that were really good with the conversation.
See
but when push came to shove.
That's the thing that the old time cops teach you when you first get on. Your greatest weapon's your mouth. The problem with the modern cops now is they're all growing up on what? Cell phones.
Yeah.
So they don't know how to use this. And that's a problem, right? So yeah, so it's martial arts, fascinating subject. I'm glad you came on. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Sensei. Thank you for having
If
me.
you ever want me on your podcast, I'll be happy to come on. I don't turn down any podcasts because I want to spread the word. I want to help guys. I have a lot of the authors on now that are writing books. I want to help them sell books. Because I want more books. I want them to do more work, right? So guys got a podcast. I'm lucky. I have a decent amount of subscribers for a martial arts podcast. I want to, expose more people. So yeah, let me know. I'd be happy to do that. And
I will hold you to that, Sensei.
Okay.
I would love that. Thank you
right,
so much for having me.
I appreciate you coming on.
No, thank you so much.
All right, take care.
And keep up the great work, Sensei.
Thanks.
So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Tuari Dawson Sensei. I mean, I really enjoyed it. Anytime I can talk to someone about a cultural martial art, I'm always fascinated by it. Discussion about the importance of the tattoos in the Māori culture, very, very interesting stuff. So I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it. And please, if you did, like, share, subscribe, consider becoming a member. All right. And thank you all again for watching. And I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.